Hello everyone, Network Wizkid here, and today we're going to be covering how to integrate Microsoft SQL Server with Cisco ISE. What we'll be doing as well is a write-up on this particular subject because it can be quite lengthy, especially when you consider the SQL elements. So do look out for that on my website. I will include a link also in this video description as well. This could be considered to be covered under the blueprint topic 4.7, which is ISE integration with external identity sources. That is the CCIE security blueprint. However, as I've also put there, it doesn't specifically mention Microsoft SQL integration. All it mentions is integration with external identity sources. And that being said, SQL can be an external identity source, as we're going to see in this demonstration. So this particular subject or topic came about one, because of the CCIE security blueprint, as I've mentioned, and two, because I had a customer requirement that wanted to simplify their ISE authorization policies and not have the need to create multiple policies. So this is a good way of doing so, and we'll cover this. I think I've got a use case example in here that we can cover later on. So just back to more specifically, in Microsoft SQL can be integrated with this Cisco ISE, no problem. To do what we're going to do today, it does require some knowledge of SQL, and you'll see why later on. I touched on a kind of brief use case, but the use cases include the ability to streamline the authorization policies and authenticate endpoints and users as well. Doesn't have to be used for authentication though. Other sources can be used for authentication. So what that means is you can still use, let's say for instance, Active Directory to authenticate users, and then the authorization can come from the SQL server using ODBC. TCP 1433 is the default protocol and port used. So if there is any access control solutions between the SQL server and ISE, it is recommended that you, well, not recommended, you actually need to make sure that that port is open. I've put there that an SQL server account with credentials is required with the correct level of access, so that it can be integrated with, or so that it can be used actually for integration with Cisco ISE, and we'll cover that as well later on. So a particular use case here, and it's similar to kind of what one of my customers wanted, was customer X has an SQL database with 500 phones capable of only performing MAB or MAC authentication bypass. Furthermore, the phones need to be assigned to different VLANs as they belong to different departments. The customer doesn't want to create multiple authorization policies in ISE because this won't scale well. And in the future, when more phones are added or more departments, again, it's going to be a management nightmare, basically trying to add more authorization policies. With that, customer X would like one authorization policy in ISE to provide each device the correct level of authorization. So this particular use case fits well with what we're going to be doing today with Microsoft SQL Server and Cisco ISE integration. You can use other SQL servers, but this demonstration is specifically focusing on Microsoft SQL. Most of the configuration actually sits within the Microsoft SQL or SQL in general, and you'll see that as we kind of go through. The actual ISE configuration steps is pretty straightforward, providing you've got the SQL elements in place. So we'll just run through the steps here, and we'll cover these in the demonstration as well, step by step, so you can really get an understanding as to what we're doing and why. So the first step there would be to install Microsoft SQL and ensure that TCP 1433 is open between ISE and the server, as I mentioned earlier, because ISE will, when we try to integrate to the SQL server, the communication port is TCP 1433 by default on Microsoft SQL. You can also specify, if you do change the port, you can also specify the port on Cisco ISE as well, but by default it's 1433. Second step would be to start the SQL Server service using the SQL Server Configuration Manager, and we'll take a look at this. The first time I started looking at this, this actually caught me out, and until I actually started that, I wasn't able to get very far. So just wanted to point that out there for those that are not really working with SQL on a daily basis. Using the SQL Server Management Studio or any other SQL editor tool, log into the Windows authentication, log in actually using Windows authentication, and create a new database and SQL authentication account with the correct permissions. These permissions will be used for the integration with ISE. Step 4 would be to change the SQL Server authentication setting to SQL Server and Windows authentication mode. So this will allow authentication to the SQL Server, not only using Windows authentication but using SQL Server credentials as well. Then what we'll do is we'll start getting into the meat and bones of all this. So we'll then create a new table and populate the fields, or use an existing one for the following. If you are following along and you're familiar with Microsoft SQL and you may have tables already set up, like I say, you can use the existing tables and modify them how you see fit. In this demonstration, we'll create tables for the device MAC addresses. We'll create a computer group. In this particular demonstration, we're actually going to be focusing on MAB computers, so that's why it says MAB computer group. We'll then create some attributes. We'll create some user and group mappings, and then we'll map some of these together where we need to. And then what we'll do is we'll create some stored procedures for the username retrieval, group retrieval, and attribute retrieval, which will all be used when ISE, Cisco ISE, goes out to get or retrieve that information. In terms of ISE configuration steps, pretty straightforward. So we're going to add the SQL Server as an ODBC external identity store and ensure that the relevant fields are populated within that. So similar to, for those that are familiar with adding Active Directory in ISE, it's a similar process to that. We're then going to test the connection to the server just to make sure that we have connectivity to the server before we continue. And then what we'll do is we'll then get into the policy set and we'll create the authorization profile to begin with to match the VLAN attribute. So we're going to match, we're going to take the attribute of the VLAN, place that in the authorization profile so that that can be used to provide the correct VLAN to our users or MAC addresses that are stored within the server. And you'll see how that works in more detail. What we'll do then is we'll create a new policy and specify the authentication and authorization policies. And then the authorization profile that we created, we'll add that to the results of the authorization policy. Then what we'll do lastly is we'll view the authentication results in the Radius Live logs. So I have some devices that we can use to test and demonstrate this functionality, and you'll see how the authorization profile in particular works and allows us to meet this customer requirement, which is, you know, streamline or simplify the authorization rules. For the lab setup, we are going to be using the Microsoft SQL Server 2019. For the editor tool, we'll be using the Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio 18. We're also using Cisco ISE 3.0, Cisco Catalyst 3560X switch, and that's going to be used for our devices and authentication of those devices. And then lastly, we've got two devices for testing. This is a topology of kind of how the lab environment looks today. So we, as I said, we've got two devices which are going to be doing map down here on the right hand side. We've got the switch that will be sending those requests to ISE, and then we've got the SQL server which will be retrieving the relevant information. Our management device here, where we'll be using and demonstrating the configurations, will be used as well. So what we'll do now is we'll jump into the demonstration, and we'll start with step 1. So here is our SQL Server Management Studio up and running. We've got Microsoft SQL Server installed now. So what we'll do is we will now ensure that the Microsoft SQL Server service is actually running using the SQL Server Configuration Manager. So I've got that open, and I've already set this to running, but I just want to point this out so that you don't forget if it's the same case in the future. So when you open SQL Server Configuration Manager, if you go down to SQL Server Services, I think by default SQL Server Browser and the agent is running, but the SQL Server itself isn't. So what you need to do is you need to make sure you start that service. So you can either do that by right clicking, or you can double click on that, and you can start the service here as well. So once we've done that, let's come off of that. We'll log into our server. So I'll just disconnect there because I was already connected to one. So we'll just go to connect, and when you first connect, you want to connect using, in this case, this is localhost. I'm on the same device, and then using Windows authentication. So once you connect, the first thing you need to do is we'll create a new database, and we'll also create an SQL authentication account as well. So to create a new database, we'll just, in the Object Explorer here, we'll just expand that, and then on databases we'll right click and press new database, and I'll give this a name of ISE Demo, for instance. So what I'll do now is I'll just press OK on that, and then once I've done that, we can see that the new database here is created. What I'll do now is I will create that new SQL account. So we need to go to security, logins, and you'll see your logins here. So right click on logins, click new login, and what we want to do here is we want to say SQL Server Authentication. We'll give it a login name. So again, I'll call this ISE Demo. Yeah, I'll just call it ISE Demo account without the underscore. And then we'll give this a password. And then once we've done that, what we'll do is we'll go to user mappings. And what we want to do is we want to map this user to a database. So you can see the ones that I created. So we'll select the one that we just created. So ISE Demo. And that's going to be our user then mapped to, you can see that ISE Demo accounts mapped to ISE Demo. And then what we'll do as well, we can leave the schema actually for now. What we'll do as well, we need to make sure that the relevant access is given here. So we'll say DB access admin. We want data reader, data writer, data admin, or DDL admin rather, and we want database owner as well. And once we've done that, the rest of the settings should be okay. So we'll just go ahead and press OK on that, and now you can see that our ISE Demo account's being created. So if we just double click on that again, user mappings, yeah, it's given us a schema anyway, so we don't need to worry about that. So that's good. Okay, so once that's done, we need to now change the authentication settings for the actual SQL server. So again, I think I've already done this, but I will show you how to do this. So on the actual SQL server itself, if we just right click and go down to properties, and then what we want to do is go to security, and by default Windows authentication mode will be set. So what we want to do is change that to SQL server and Windows authentication mode, as you can see here. Once you've done that, go ahead and press OK, and we can actually test that access now on that user. So if we just right click on the server and disconnect, and then if we just go back to connect, what we can do is change this to SQL server authentication. We can leave that as localhost, and we can give the login name as ISE Demo account, and I've done the underscore again. Give it the password that you set and connect. Yeah, so if you don't change the option to change password when you sign in, you will have to change your password. So let's just change that now. And there you go. So you can see that I am in into the server now. So if we expand, we can see that I can see everything that we could see before. Logins, I've only got my account here that you can see as well. So yeah, if you look at user mappings, you can see that everything's there as we set before. So once that's done, we need to create new tables. So what we're going to do first is, if we go into Object Explorer and we expand our database, as I've just done there, and then if you go to tables, and what we need to do now that we're in tables, we need to right click and create a new table. So for this specific table, what we'll do in the column name is we'll call it group ID. This is going to be integer. We'll take that out. We don't want to allow null. Let's create group name, and this will be var character max, and we don't want to allow null either, and we can create a group description, and we'll just say we want to allow in fact we need to change that to text, and we can allow null for that. We don't have to populate that. What we need to do for group ID is if we right click here, we can set this as a primary key like that, and then for now we'll say that that's fine. We can save the table. If we give the table a name, so what we'll call this table is groups. Let's call this groups. Okay, so that's tables saved as groups, as you can see. Now if you reload this, you should see the table come in here. So there you go, table groups there. We'll also create a new table, and this one is going to be for the MAC addresses. So let's say we'll call this column user ID, be integer as well. We don't want to allow null. And then what we'll do in this column, we'll say MAC address. We'll change this to by character max. And then we don't want to allow null on that either. And again with this one, for user ID, we'll set that as the primary key here. Once we've done that, we'll just go ahead and save that. So what we'll call this one is we'll call this let's call this MAC addresses. Like that. We'll create another table now for the attributes. So we'll say user ID, it's an integer as well, don't want to allow null, attribute name, var character max, don't want to allow null there. And we'll do the value for the attribute value. And we don't want to allow null for that either. So again, we'll save this one as attributes. And then we need to create our last table, which is going to be for group mappings. So we'll say user ID again, we don't want to allow null, and then group ID, let me just go back to groups, yeah, group ID, because we're going to map the two of them, so make sure I get it right. Okay, allow null, and that's fine. So what we'll do now is we'll save this as user group mappings. Okay, so we got 4 tables that we've created there, and now what we need to do is we need to go ahead and populate them. So I'll just refresh this actually so we can see the tables. So you can see all the tables here. So we'll start off with the top to bottom. So we'll do attributes first, and what we want to do is right click on that, edit top 200 rows. And then we'll be able to edit here. So let's just say user ID 1, and you'll see the relevance in the user ID. We're essentially mapping it to the MAC addresses. We'll say attribute name is VLAN because that's what we're trying to match on, and we'll just give it a value of let's say give it a value of 30. Press enter on that. and we can see now that that's populated. So that's good. So that's one done. So we'll leave it at that for now. Now let's do the same with groups. So we'll go right click, edit top 200 rows, and we'll say this is group ID 1. We'll say the group name is let's call it Map Computers, and we can give it a description if you want. If you remember, I allowed null, so we don't have to give it a description. This is just for references, but we'll just say all map computers, and press enter on that, and that's good. Same with MAC addresses, edit top 200 rows, and now this is where the it comes into play here. So if we just press we give it a user ID 1, and then what I'll do is I'll specify the MAC addresses from the 2 test devices I have. So let me just get those up. So I've got one here, so I'll just paste that in there, and what I need to do is I'll just change the format of this there we go. So that's one, and then what we'll do is we'll add in the second one as well. We'll just put that in here, and again I'll just change the MAC address format. Oops, and then we need to specify the user ID. So that's the MAC addresses that we're going to use to test as per our lab. So once that's done, what we'll do is we'll go to user group mappings. So we'll say, so we did our groups, so we can see that we've only got one group. So we'll map both of them to the same group. So if we just edit that as well, and if we just say user ID, which is the user ID here, or will be, that we specified, so we've got 1 and 2, we're going to map them to group ID 1. So user ID 2 is going to be mapped to group ID 1 as well. So that's both of those, well, all of those tables done. Now what we need to do is we need to create what we call a foreign key relationship with some of the tables, so that we can match some of the information up, mainly the group IDs and the user IDs as well. So to do that, if we get open again the relevant tables, and to do that we can right click and press design. So we'll start off with groups. What we want to do is we want to right click on group ID, and if we go to relationships, we want to add a relationship here, and then what we need to do is expand table and column specification, and then we can give this a name, groups, groups, and we'll call it and group mappings. And what we want to do here is we want to say that the user group mappings is, and we might have to do this actually on the user group mappings instead, but essentially what we're doing is we're tying the 2 group IDs together. Yeah, so if let's just go off this a minute, and we go to user group mapping design, and then and then we'll follow the same process. So we just go to, just right click here, relationships, and we'll add tables and column specification. What we want to do is under here we select groups, and then we've got foreign key table user group mappings, which is what we're in, and then we select group ID and group ID. Okay with that, and then under table designer we need to insert and update specifications so that any modifications are cascaded between the two tables. So we'll do that, and then we need to do another one for the user ID. So if we just add another one, and if we go to tables again, and then we specify MAC addresses, and in there we specify the user ID, and in group mappings we specify also the user ID. And again with the inserts and updates, we'll cascade for delete and update, and that should be it for that rule. So we'll close that, and then what we'll do is we'll do the same with attributes. If we go to design, relationship, add, expand tables, and then under here we want to select MAC addresses, user ID, and we're going to match that user ID with the attributes user ID as well. And again set to cascade, and then we'll close that. And with that we should be good with the rest of them. So we'll continue now. Now what we'll do is create what we call stored procedures, and these will allow us to retrieve the information from within the database when we've integrated it with ISE. So to do that, what we need to do is we need to go down to programmability, store procedures, and then if we just right click on that, create a new stored procedure, you get a template, but what we'll do is we'll delete that because I have some templates created already, and these will be shared as well on my website. So the first one we're going to create will be for us to return the MAC addresses. So this one's slightly different, but what we can do is we can modify this as well. So create procedure, and we database is going to be, we can leave that actually. So that's the name of this script. We need to change this to, let's see if I got it open still. As begin, select, change that to MAC address, and this is going to be from, we're pulling it from ISE demo table. Username will be MAC addresses. And then we can change this from we called the table MAC addresses. So we're going to pull that from MAC addresses for invalid users. It's going to be the same. So MAC address change that to MAC address. So that's the same essentially. So all we're doing there is saying for MAC address is select if the user's in MAC address, and it's telling you where it is, then it's going to return this if it's a valid user, and then if it's not a valid user, you'll get an authentication error. So we can also execute that. We can see that there's an error, incorrect syntax. Where's that one? Line 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oops, yeah, there's the issue. So that should be the table, not the database. MAC address is like that. Let's try now. So yeah, that completes successfully now. So I just made that issue there. So once that's done, let's save that query, and we'll call this. In fact, what we'll do is we'll call it. Let's call it this one: record set free ISE auth user plain returns record set. Yeah, let's call it that. So once that's done, what we'll do now is we'll create another procedure which will fetch the groups. So again, if we just refresh on E, we should see that come through in a minute. There we go. So let's create another procedure. And again, if we delete this template, and I've got mine, we'll change here as well. MAC address, results input output. Let's begin from MAC addresses. MAC address at MAC address. Begin result, select group name from groups. Yeah, that's fine. Where group ID, select group ID from user group mappings. That needs to be mappings where user group mapping, let me just check that one. Group ID where user group mappings is the user ID. Yep. Select so for group ID we're selecting from user group mappings, and then for user ID select user ID from MAC addresses. MAC address is where MAC address equals MAC address. Make sure I've not missed out here. Okay, so that looks good. So again, if we just execute that, yeah, that's fine. That's come back fine. So hopefully that should be good. You can also, I'll show you as well how you can actually test as well. So this is going to be, let's call this ISE group retrieval 2. And we'll call it 3. Keep it with the same format. So we can actually test these as well. So if we, let me just refresh this here. and if you right click on this and execute store procedure, you can we're not going to pass a null value, we can actually put a MAC address in here. So if we use one of the MAC addresses that we had, let me just get it back up. Let's just put this in here, change the format as I did before. Oops, that's not right. Yeah, there we go. Change that format, delete that. No, that's not right. 48. OF. Oh, it's that. OF. Let's see. DC 48 OFCF DC. We're missing B here, that's why. DCB. And there we go. So let me just make sure that's right. Okay, that looks good. So once we're done, if you just press let's just press enter on that and then press OK. We haven't got a result here. Let's have a look. Invalid object name, user group mappings. So if we just look at this message, we can see that it's telling us what the issue is. So we've got an invalid object name. And this is part of the battle when you're doing these scripts and stuff. You need to make sure that everything matches up. So you can see here user group mapping, and we specified user groups mappings. So let's just go back to our script and let's change this here. So user group mappings. So we'll remove that. Let's save that again, and then if we let me just execute that. Yeah, that's fine. That's just telling us it's already created, so basically we just need to shut that, refresh that, and then that should have updated. So once that's done, so what we'll do is we'll try and again, so execute store procedure. Let's paste in that value again. So we've got an invalid object name again, so have I missed one? So let's modify this. Let's go with that. That should have updated, so that doesn't look like it's updated. Mappings, user group mapping. So let's just do that again. And then let's save that, and we did it as group retrieval free. Replace that, and then what we'll do is let's just execute that. Okay, that's fine. So let's just refresh these again. And then let's try and execute that again. Yay, so that's better. So now you can see that the result has returned back for that MAC address we specified. It's returned back the group that it belongs to, which is Map Computers. So that's good. We can do the same as well for the username. So let's just put in the MAC address, and you can see there that it gives us that, it tells us that it's a valid user. So again, if we just executed this and put any random string in there, we can see that it says ODBC authentication error. So that's exactly what we want it to do. So what we'll do now is we'll create stored procedures for the attributes, and we should be good then. So let's create our last stored procedure for attributes, and again I'll copy one that I did earlier and modify the fields. So as you can see, guys, if you are following along and you've created separate or different named tables, do make sure, and fields within those tables, do make sure that those match up as well. So let's change this to MAC address. We're selecting from MAC addresses where MAC address, I should just copy that, actually make it quicker. Begin, set result 0, select attribute name, attribute value from user attributes. So we have, ours is called attributes. Yeah, so ours is called attributes. So that's our table there, attributes. Where user ID, in select user ID from, we're going to select it from MAC addresses, where MAC address is MAC address. So that looks good. Let's execute that. That seems fine. So let's save that SQL query, and we'll call this, have we got one that we can change? So we'll call attribute retrieval 3. That changes to green. So let's go ahead now and refresh this, and we'll just do our last test on the attribute retrieval. So we right click, execute stored procedure. Again, let's put in our MAC address, which is not that. Can I nick it from? Let's get rid of that actually. Let's take it from here. Let's just execute that again. So execute stored procedure. Let's put in that MAC address. Yay! So you can see based on the MAC address, we get the attribute VLAN 30, which is good, what we want. So we know that the stored procedures work now. The tables are set up in our database. So what we need to do now, once all that work is done in Microsoft SQL, we now need to go across to ISE. So we'll open ISE now. So once you have access to ISE, and we're using ISE 3.0, to go to administration, external identity sources, and then under ODBC we'll click add to add an identity source. We'll give it a name, so let's call this ODBC demo. Under connection, we specify the host name and port. As I mentioned earlier, if you're using anything other than the default 1433, you can specify the port as well. So let me add in mine. So it's SQL Wizkid.com, and our database name, if you remember, was ISE demo. Our username was ISE demo account. So ISE demo is our database. Our username as well, specify that. So ISE demo account, and then the password for that. And then you can leave timeout and retries as it is. And then depending on what database you're using, you need to specify. So I'm using Microsoft SQL, and then we can test that connection. So we can see here connection here has succeeded, which I was expecting. We haven't specified any of these yet, so we need to now configure them as well. So we'll go across to store procedures. We'll leave return record set as it is, and what we need to do is we need to populate now the check username or machine exists, fetch groups, and fetch attributes as well. And we can change this format to that format. So we use the attributes from the name. So what we'll do now is we'll just get those names back up. In fact, I think I've got them open somewhere. Copy that one across. So this is for attributes. Fetch groups. Let's get that one up for here. Get rid of that. And then lastly we need the MAC address one as well, so we'll pull that one as well, which is this one. Okay, so let's go ahead and put that in there, and now if we go back to connection, you can see that these have changed now because we just populated those fields as well. So that's all good on that front. Now what we need to do is we need to add in the VLAN attributes. So if we select attribute and then we specify that MAC address we used earlier on, let's use this one. And this is just a test username, if you like, just to or MAC address rather, just so that we can retrieve the attributes associated. And you can see there that we retrieve the VLAN attribute successfully. So we'll select that, press OK. And similarly with groups, we'll do the same. Retrieve, and then you can see that the map computer group has been retrieved. So once that's all done, we know everything's functioning successfully there because we've managed to pull the attributes and the groups based on the groups, attributes, and MAC addresses that we've used, the store procedures. We've verified the connection, so now we'll just go ahead and press save here. That just gives you a warning saying that not all stored procedures have been configured, and in this case we don't need that. So now that that's done, we can go to policy and result. And this is really where the magic happens here. So if we just go to authorization profiles and we add a new one, and we'll call this one ODBC profile. Access accept, leave that, and all we're going to do here is under VLAN in this particular demonstration, we're going to add in the name that we just specified. So in fact, let me just open another tab here and we can flick between the two so that I can show you. If I just quickly flick back to external identity sources here, ODBC, and what it's looking for now is the name here. So what we'll specify here is this name, so ODBC demo, and then what we'll specify then as the VLAN tag is the attribute. So we're going to specify VLAN. So we'll specify VLAN. You notice we aren't specifying any specific VLAN. So basically what this is going to do is once we've created the authentication authorization policy and this result is matched, ODC, the Microsoft SQL server will essentially look up that VLAN associated and assign that relevant VLAN. So we go there and that's done. So you can see it populates and based on our parameters that we specified and more. Once that's done, we'll press submit on that. We don't need to do anything else. That says that already exists. I don't know why that does, but let's say profile 1. And now what we'll do is we'll go across to policy sets and we'll add a new policy for this demo, ODBC demo, and let's just say if it's wired map, let's just keep it simple here because we're using wired map here. So if we're using my wired map, I've got a allow protocols which is map only, so we'll specify that. I'll save that, and then now let's go into the actual policy set. So for authentication, again, this is a demonstration, so if you're running this or you're going to be running this in production, then it does make sense to tidy up your policies, but for this demonstration we'll keep it simple. So we'll keep the default and we can use our ODBC external identity source here and for our authentication. Now for authorization, let's just add another. We'll say ODBC authorization, and in the profile we'll select the new one that we created, so ODBC profile 1, and then let's say we'll match it on the group. So let's say for instance let's find ODBC demo external group, and we can see we can specify that group here. So we'll say map computers, we'll use that. So if it's external group ODBC demo and the group matches, we'll give it this profile. So we'll go ahead now and press save on that. And what I'll do now is we're pretty much good to go. So I will let's just go back to the SQL server. Actually, I just want to check one more thing. The attributes. So we actually had 2 users. Yeah, we had 2 users. So what I want to do actually is in the attributes, and we don't need to change this in ISE now because we've got the VLAN attribute already. But what I want to do here is I just want to say user ID 2 is going to be VLAN 20. Let's say that, and then it should be part of the same group. So user group mappings. Yeah, we can see it's part of the same group. So essentially what will happen now is if we look at the attributes, because we're using the VLAN attribute, user 2 is going to get VLAN 20 and user 1 is going to get VLAN 30. All under that one policy we've created here. We don't have to create any more authorization policies for this. So this really shows you how good this method is. If you do have any sort of use cases around this, it can really scale well and save you the time and effort having to create multiple authorization policies. So we've saved that now. What I'll do is I'll fire up the 2 test devices, and then we can see a little bit more on the radius logs as to what gets assigned, and we'll also take a quick look at the switch before concluding. So I've fired those two devices up now. So what we'll do is we'll go to the radius live logs, and we'll take a look and see what the authorization policy is looking like. So we've got the live logs open, and we just need to, the devices are connected, so we just need to verify the connections now. So what I'll do on the switch is, if I just do clear off sessions, and then we should see them devices re-authenticate again. Ignore all this stuff, this is other stuff that's going on in the lab. So yeah, we can see one device there that's authenticated successfully. We should see the other one come through in a minute, but let's look at this one. So if we look, we can see that based on the MAC address, the VLAN 20 has been assigned. So if we just check this MAC address in this SQL server, we can see here that this is ID 2, and if we just check the attributes, we can see that ID 2 is VLAN 20, so ID 1 should get VLAN 30. So let's see if that's come through yet. Let's just change this to 5 minutes. B8, so that one's not come through yet, so I'll tell you what I'll do, I'll just kick to 5. I should kickstart that one now, that should come through in a minute. So yeah, we see that one come through, so we can see that that MAC address is 48, starting with 48. So if we just have a look here, we can see that the VLAN 30 is being given for this one as opposed to 20 like the other one. And all we've done, just scroll to the top here, we can see that we're using that ODBC profile to quickly change that name, which has that VLAN, that custom VLAN attribute specified, which looks up against ODBC. So if we just do so we can see that gig 8 is in an on-off state, and I think that's because of the actual VLAN itself. So if I just do show VLAN brief, I can see that one's already specified for voice. So what I'll do is let's use VLAN 60. So let's go back to ODBC, and we'll change this one to VLAN 60. And now what we'll do is we'll just clear that session, and then we'll watch that come back. Come back, yeah, let's just change that to every 3 seconds. And while that's doing that, let's also see what it's doing on the switch. Let's do, yeah, so that one's not come back yet, so let's just do first gig 0.8, speed it up a bit. Okay, I can see that's come back now, so yeah, now we can see that that's authorized, as you can see. And if we look now at the authentication log, we can see now that that VLAN tag has changed to 80. So you can see we've got, just flick back to get rid of that one. So you can see we've only got one authorization policy with one authorization result, but that result is returning the relevant VLAN for each device based on what's configured in ODBC. So all we need is this one authorization policy as opposed to, say, 10, 20, 30, even 100 depending on the organization. So it's quite cool and really scalable. If we just flick now back to, just before we conclude, flick back to our switch. If we just do show interface gig 08 detail, we can also see that server policy assigned is the VLAN group VLAN 60, and now we can see that our interface is assigned into that as well, so that's quite cool. And then similarly with gig 5, we can see that the server policies give out VLAN 30, and we can see here that that's also assigned to VLAN 30. So that's essentially how we can configure Microsoft SQL Server with Cisco ISE and use this for scaling with only a few policies if you have a large environment. If you have a large environment with multiple devices and the need for multiple policies, this might just be one way for you to easily manage those devices with as few policies as possible. If you found this video useful, please do subscribe, like, and if you've got any questions, please leave them in the comments and I'll do my best to get back to you.